And I think we get into this trouble because we're not framing history correctly. The bad version of this is the person who comes along and says, this story you were told is all wrong. It's actually this. The framers of the American Republic were a bunch of like bigoted white guys who throw out your previous, they're all kind of heroic. That's the wrong frame. It's about layers.
Yes.
So the first layer is totally true. The framers of the American Republic were a bunch of extraordinary, thoughtful, brilliant, courageous people who conceived of the first great functioning democracy in the world out of nothing, right? Second layer, they're complicated. They're human beings, right? Third layer, this is the 18th century, right? They're
right.
living. Yeah. Fourth, we can keep going,
yes,
right? And then we can tell our individual stories. These guys have mistresses and they have debts and they tell lies and they get into trouble and they get into fistfights and whatever. We can keep on going down, but it doesn't, just because I've discovered a sixth layer doesn't invalidate the first five.
When I woke up very confused, she said, you almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive.
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an IRONCLAD original. Hey everybody, welcome to On the X. I'm Chris Irwin, and today my guest is Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm is the best-selling author of Outliers, Talking to Strangers, Blink, David and Goliath, What the Dog Saw, The Bomber Mafia, and soon a follow-up to his breakout, The Tipping Point, called Revenge of the Tipping Point, which releases this fall. He's also the founder of the audio production company Pushkin Industries and the host of the podcast Revisionist History. Their 11th season, Hitler's Olympics, examines the complicated issues surrounding the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. And then he's also got a new podcast called Medal of Honor, Stories of Courage, which unpacks the stories of Medal of Honor recipients. The question I didn't get to in our conversation was asking how Malcolm would describe himself in one word. If I were to do it, the word would be storyteller, and one of the best. It kind of doesn't matter what he's talking about, you just feel compelled to listen. And that was certainly true in our discussion. So here we go with Malcolm Gladwell on the X. This could go so many different directions, right? Like you have such a huge body of work, but I really want to talk about some of the new stuff that you have coming out. And I think the best place to start is with this Medal of Honor podcast that you have coming out, I think in a couple weeks, right? Like it's later this month that's starting. So like what brought that about? Like these are stories that are out there, right? Like, I mean, you can read these citations, but what made you want to dig deeper into Medal of Honor stories and kind of dive into that?
Well, a friend of mine named Dan McGinn, who's this really, really interesting guy, very good friend of mine, has been, like many Americans, very distressed about all of the things pulling us apart as a country.
Yeah.
And he got in his head that, 2026 is the 250th anniversary of, wait, am I getting that right? Yes. The 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. And he said it was an incredible opportunity for us to find things that'll bring us together. And he said to me, one of the things that does bring us all together is stories about courage and heroes.
Yeah.
And I had known years ago, I had randomly read a collection of Medal of Honor sort of stories, citations in some book it was a book that was like 60 years ago, old or so. And it was amazing. And so I just thought, oh, that's such a good idea. And we'll just go and find these stories. And what's fascinating about them, we can get into this, is that they're all more interesting than you think. I mean, we all know they're interesting. And then you get into them and they're like complicated and they're all different in some fascinating way. And the shape that courage takes is so incredibly different from one. Anyway, it's been an amazing journey for us here at Pushkin. But it all started with my friend Dan saying, is there something out here that brings us all together.
And how do you, I mean, there's like 3,500 plus stories out there, right? And I'm sure some of them have more details than others, but how do you decide where to start? Like which one?
Yeah.
How do you line those up and say, okay, let's start with this one?
Well, we have we got a team of people who've been working on this, principally a really wonderful young woman named Meredith Kahn. And I mean, I think we're looking for, ones where possible you want to have some tape of the winner. So that rules out a lot of, like, there's a lot of Civil War ones.
Yep.
Obviously,
yeah.
World War I ones where it's hard to get. You really want to hear the person if you can. And you want to have some variety. We did one episode on the only woman to ever have won the Medal of Honor. There's an incredible story from the First World War about Henry Johnson, which is...
So I was able to listen to the first two. So
you did?
So I wanted to know, like, can we let the cat out of the bag a little bit on those two episodes?
Yeah,
Are we allowed to talk about them? Okay, cool. Yeah. Because I had never heard that story about Henry Johnson, had no idea who he was. And it was such an unbelievable story about, I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about it again. Not only what he did in terms of the citation and his heroism, but like the societal implications and the kind of racism around that, and just the way he and his fellow, the Harlem Hellfighters, right? Like that, all of that was just so interesting. So yeah, talk about that, please, because I'm glad we can.
Well, that's one way. There's another. There's a couple that I really love. That's one of the ones because there's so much sort of complexity to it. But this is a young man who's living in grows up in Harlem and serves in the First World War and does something. I mean, is involved in this sort of epic kind of firefight where he single-handedly takes on an entire
with a knife. With a knife, right?
With a knife.
Yeah.
With German soldiers, and comes back and he's recognized as this incredible hero, and the story keeps going, and he becomes this kind of national character, and people start like impersonating him, and he's in the way that was true in the early 20th century. When an African American achieved that kind of fame, they became symbols of something else. They became much larger figures in the public imagination because it was such a rarity. The idea that there would be, and the story culminates in him, kind of as he's sort of trying to navigate this strange celebrity that he has and his many injuries, and he gives this speech in St. Louis, and he basically says, I haven't been treated like a hero.
Yeah.
My country hasn't greeted me the way you would expect it to greet someone who sacrificed on its behalf. And it's this, and as a result, the world sort of turns its back because of the speech. Everyone turns their back on him, and he dies young and penniless and broken somewhere in I think he takes a job in Albany at the end or something. But it's just like it's so different from the other stories, the other stories are very much about what happened on the battlefield.
Yeah, right.
Israel battle is about what happened after he came home.
Yeah.
And the reason I love that is that, and you would know this way better than me, that's really the typical story that for a lot of veterans, the fight begins when they get home.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Not in that way, thankfully, anymore.
Yeah, not in that way, but in another way, in a million different ways.
Yes, for sure.
That kind of, and that's what I wanted to get at in that story was like, our commitment to veterans does not end when the battle's over.
Yep.
And every time I'm on the subway and I see some guy who's suffering and it looks like he was a veteran, I think about that.
Yeah.
I'm like, what happened to this commitment we had to the people who would fight for our country? Why did it end when this guy came back to New York?
Right.
And that story is really getting at that, even more than the race stuff. The race stuff is a powerful part of it, but it's really broader than that. It's just about that idea that, anyway, so they're all of them, they just lead in these incredible directions. Each one of these stories. Right?
I just couldn't believe. I mean, with that one, with some of the racial implications, and it's one of those things that I don't know, with the way I just couldn't believe the treatment there of some of the things where it was basically like, it was like a letter to race. They go off and fight with the French because the army's saying, hey, we're not going to employ these guys at all, basically, right? This like, and it's like the French are like, yeah, we'll take them. And then after this act of heroism, fighting off this entire like German platoon or whatever that's like trying to overrun him, the French give him like their highest military decoration in 2 days, right? And then it takes us like, what is it, 3 or 4 decades or more, whatever it is,
to kind of
no more than that. It's like 100 years, right? Because like,
because I think Obama gets involved.
Yes, right,
I think it's just like, it's weird, because the broader context is the army is one of the military is one of the first institutions in American society to actually treat people equally, and they are the progressive force.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I remember I was doing a project a couple years ago on the Bomber Mafia, and I was hanging out with all these Air Force guys. I know you're not necessarily going to be sympathetic to Air Force guys, but
no, it's all right. We're all on the same team.
But the Air Force is like more. The upper levels of the Air Force are more kind of like seamlessly, integrated than any other institution I can think of in American life. They couldn't hide. That's the thing about the military, is they can't hide from the social issues that are gripping the country, because they are the country.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if you're running Augusta Golf Club, you can hide until
right
2010, right?
Yeah.
So that was a really fascinating one.
Well, and then the other episode, the second one, is a story that I know well as a former SEAL, right? It's about Mike Thornton and Tommy Norris. Mm-hmm. And like anybody who's a SEAL knows that story. But I'll be honest, I didn't know, and I've met those guys multiple times and spoken with them, but I didn't know all these details of it. And I was so emotionally moved that I was like crying in my, like literally had to like take a second and like allow myself to just kind of, for whatever reason, whether that touches me personally as, being a member of that community, but, and again, it's a story I've heard before, but that what they're doing in that's sort of like going back to get him over and over again and slinging him over his shoulder, and the other guy's shot and he's dragging him through the water. It's just so powerful. And even again, talking about it now, it gets me emotional thinking about it.
Yeah, that one is. Yeah, that one. I mean, they are. I mean, you try recording them. I mean, like,
right.
Keep your emotions in check when you're doing them. Those guys, it's really funny because, after working on that on that episode and learning the stories of those two guys, you really, you're left with this question: is it the institution or is it the guys? Like, how many people in their position would have done the same thing? Is this something that, and you would be in a position to answer that question?
Yeah. Well, you talk about it in there, right? This idea of, and again, I don't know if it kind of hits me harder having been in at least similar situations, right? Like, but that idea of courage as like a sort of you talk about this in a lot of your content, but this like social contagion of courage in this, or of anything, but in this case, pro-social contagion of courage. Is it something that you get being around people that are acting that way, or is it something that's just sort of innately in you, or are you trained for it? Yeah, I honestly don't know. I think there's an aspect of it clearly that is the group setting. That is, you're in this situation, you don't want to let people down, whatever you want to call that. It's interesting. I think about too, like, where do you draw the line between that and just peer pressure, or is it the same thing? right? I don't know. Like, do you have a take on that? Is that?
Well, I think it's the best part of peer pressure.
Right.
It's about setting expectations about what appropriate behavior is, right? Like, if everyone in the group is committed to a certain standard of behavior and expectations are uniform, it's really, really hard to deviate. And on the flip side, much easier to kind of reach that standard.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of beautiful thing about really effective teams, is how they can kind of effortlessly lift the general level of performance just by resetting expectations. I'm a big basketball fan, and I've been watching the NBA Finals.
Me too.
And
I'm not a huge fan, but I've been watching.
At this point, those guys have been playing, a game every 2 or 3 days since last fall.
Yeah.
At the highest level, right? And and then on Friday, they're going to go out and play again.
Yeah.
And each person is going to leave it all on the court. Yeah. I'm just in awe of that. Like, the kind of, not just the physical toll, but the psychological toll. I don't understand why don't they crumble? Why don't more people like missing all their shots or whatever? And it's because they're all in it together.
Yeah, for sure.
They don't feel like they're shouldering the burden of that by themselves. Everywhere they look, they see someone else giving that kind of effort.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, a huge piece of that, just getting back to the kind of the courage thing, it is, so, I mean, you hear this over and over again, right? It is not wanting to let the guys beside you down, right? Like it's a love and camaraderie for the guy to your left and your right, and just wanting, I'm not going to let these guys down no matter what. And so, kind of, I guess, like, sort of adapting that on a broader level, like on a societal level, even if you're not in a unit like that, like, is that something we are losing as we isolate more and more, right? Like, just this idea of, whether it's courage or anything else, this sort of communal working together towards whatever it may be. Are we losing that basically societally because of we're all like this now, right? We're like isolated, and we kind of do everything remotely, and we don't have groups. It doesn't need to be a professional basketball team or an elite special operations team, but some kind of unit that operates locally.
I think that's, it's funny, to the extent that I talk to, I run into a sort of pretty wide range of business leaders in what I do. And what's striking is how, whenever the question comes up of what are you looking for in the people you hire, almost without exception, some part of the answer is, I need someone who's done something in a team. And they'll talk about sports, but it's not the physical part of sports that interests them. They want some evidence that somebody has been part of a group that did something successfully together, that required a commitment that was outside of themselves.
Yeah.
And so I say the same thing about military service, about that that's the first thing that they don't like, that comes before how fancy the school was that they attended, or they want to see that. I was talking to a guy, we did a podcast with the guy, we do a thing with IBM, and it's the guy who will probably be, who knows, may one day be the head of IBM. It's a huge deal in the tech world. That's what he talked about when we talked about this. He's like, oh yeah, I look for somebody who's got some sports background. That was his kind of a shorthand for that. But I think that is a reaction to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we can't take it for granted that people know how to do that anymore.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, it's really good to hear, because to the extent that I've spoken with companies or whatever, still, I think so many of them are focused on experience. I hear that a lot. It's hiring people with experience. And I always try to point out, if you're just going based off experience, you're defaulting to someone that's just been around longer, right? They're just older. And that doesn't mean that they're more capable or anything. And one of the beauties of military training and some of the training that I've been through and others is nobody has experience going into that. of doing the job, right? Zero. The whole thing is about their character and their capacity. And it's like, part of that is teamwork. Like, how do you operate when the chips are down and everybody's super tired and everybody's, at the lowest possible level? What's that guy going to do? Right? Is he going to bolster his comrades, or is he going to be selfish? Right.
Yeah.
And like,
Can I interrupt you? Because it's something I'm always been fascinated with about the kind of training you guys do, which is the element that seems to come up again and again in your training, which is absent from other kind of training, is fatigue. How much of what you guys do is about testing people at the limits of their endurance? Haven't slept for X hours, or I was reading some book, and I don't think it was Navy SEAL training. I think it was like one of the other elite, Green Beret or something training. And, where you go on these sort of 48-hour hikes or whatever it is, and you're in the middle of nowhere.
Right. Yeah.
And it's all about dealing with the degradation in cognitive and psychological performance at the edges of your physical. That's what interests me. Is like, because you know this better than I do. You can be really good at something when you had a good night's rest and it's 11 in the morning and you had your coffee. But that does not tell us
100%.
How are you going to be doing 12 hours later when you had no food to eat and you've been right? That's what's interesting.
Well, and it's why those selection courses, you can't just have a physical test or draw blood or something and be like, oh, that's how we're going to pick things. You have to have a 6-month or whatever it may be, a long crucible that gets people to those depths, right? That deprives them of all those things, because that's the only way you find out. There's just no, there's no shortcut to it that I can think of. Yeah. But the challenge is, right, like if you apply that to corporate America or something, like, okay, well, how do you do that? Because you can't take people out and get them cold, wet, and sandy for weeks or whatever like that to try and figure out their character to hire them. And I think that's the real challenge. If you put that emphasis on those things instead of, again, oh, he's got a great resume with tons of experience or whatever. It's like, well, let's really get to the depth of this person's character. How do you do that? I don't know. Maybe somebody out there can design some kind of, I don't know what it is, but it's an interesting experiment to try to figure it out.
I've said this many times. One of the things I always ask when I'm hiring assistants, my most important question is, do you drive a manual transmission? And because I want to know, have you taken the time to master something that's not essential?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
That you can get away with. But is useful in certain extreme situations, right? You're stuck somewhere. That's the only car that's available, right? That's a little bit hard, right? That, and then people's answers. So there's many good answers. One answer is, one guy, the best guy I ever hired, he was like, of course. I was like, why? You're like 21. Why would you know? He goes, because I park cars for a summer. I'm like, all right.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Come on over.
Yeah.
And then the other good answer is, no, but will you teach me how?
Good.
That's better. That's an even better answer.
That's a good answer.
I only got that once.
Yep. So this is good news for my son, my oldest son, because when he's 17, when he got his license and bought his first car, we're like, the only thing it's required, you have to buy a standard transmission. You have to buy a manual.
Love that.
So we, of course, he couldn't test drive it because he didn't know how to drive it. So we found him a used Subaru, and both my wife and I test drove it, and we both, it's so fun. Like, if you don't drive a stick normally, it's like, man, this is so fun.
Is it intimidating to be the teenage son of a former Navy SEAL?
No, I don't think so. Because it's
really,
no, I mean, like I was off active duty when he was very young. And so it hasn't been, I mean, aside from the fact of me working at the foundation now, it hasn't been like front and center, like me going, he doesn't have any memories of me deploying or anything like that. So, other than sort of plaques on the wall and like still being involved with the community, obviously, like giving back as much as I can and all of that, it hasn't been, I mean, I don't know. You'd have to ask him if it's intimidating, but
what would he say? What's the difference between,
No. This is,
what's the difference between being your son or the son of an accountant? Like, what would your son say to that? Like, does it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's honestly because, again, he didn't experience or very little. He did. What's that?
You're still you.
Yeah, true.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And so, but that's a personality thing, right? Like, and it's not. I don't know. My sort of day-to-day life isn't sort of militaristic or for lack of a better term in any way. So, and put it this way, I don't know if this is a good thing or I don't know what this is a reflection of, but none of my kids have any interest in going to the military. And my wife is former military too. Like she's retired military as well. So you got, 2 retired naval officers and none of our kids want to go in the military. So, I don't know what that means, but I didn't come from it was sort of the other way around. Like my parents weren't in the military. They were like 60s hippies kind of, and so,
really?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent, I mean, I not like on the extreme level, but certainly like very liberal kind of, yeah. I mean, went to Cornell in the 60s and kind of, so that's, I don't come from a military family. My grandfather was in World War II, like, enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have it's like a great uncle who was a Naval Academy grad, but that's it. It's not like a big family legacy thing. So do you have any military, like in your background?
No, my family are all, my grandfathers were too young for World War I and too old for World War II.
Yep.
And, I grew up in Canada, so not a lot of wars in Canada in the last 50 years. No, it's all very kind of hypothetical. Although I do think it's funny. I'm interested in this because my father, who was a mathematician, a big egg-headed academic, would have been a fantastic soldier.
Yeah,
because he had that kind of discipline and worked well at the fringes of. He was an ox, and he had no fear, physical fear. He just did stuff.
So there you go. But that's speaking sort of like natural courage, right? The idea that it's just kind of innate.
I do think he had a lot of self-confidence and he also had a lot of trust. So if he was with someone, I'm imagining now, my father's been dead 6 years, 7 years. I'm imagining him now, but he was the kind of person, I imagine that if he was serving under you and he thought you were really competent, and I saw him do this numerous times. If he thought you knew what you were doing and you could prepare him properly, he would follow you to the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
So he had that kind of mindset, which is, if you're good, I'm along for the ride. Now, if he thought you weren't, he'd be out.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a real kind of open mind about, and I often think about that's an essential component in a lot of these stories of courage, is these are people who are willing to trust systems and other people and training, and they have faith that this stuff will prepare them.
Yeah.
Right. They're not going in.
Yes.
I feel like that's a really, really crucial part of it.
Right. Yeah, of course, there's that, I'm going to botch it a little bit, right? But that, like, you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training, right? That idea, and certainly, you're more confident, the more, whatever it may be, the more you are, the better trained you are. So I just kind of going on the whole kind of social contagion thing. One of the other things you have coming out in the fall is, I love the title too, this sort of Revenge of the Tipping Point, right? It's part 2 of the tipping point, which is, when I saw that too, like 25 years ago, I didn't read it 25 years ago, but I was like, wow, I can't believe that book's been out there for that long. But that first book was sort of about this idea of social epidemics, what creates that tipping point to make something go, so to speak. So what's changed that's making you kind of go back to that subject and write another volume about it?
Because kind of struck by how much kind of social engineering is going on underneath the surface. People manipulating, sometimes positively, but often negatively, epidemics for their own purposes. So the signature story in the book is, I end with it, is the story of the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
And that's really about how kind of brilliantly, makes it sound like it's positive, but how brilliantly Purdue Pharmaceutical understood the social dynamics of physician prescribing behavior. They understood there's a very small number of physicians that if you visit them often enough and you tell them a compelling enough story, will write an infinite number of prescriptions for OxyContin.
Yeah.
And no one had figured that out before to that level, right? Or I have a chapter about a school in a town called Poplar Grove, a very wealthy, beautiful. I went there. I don't name it. Kind of upper middle class suburb that had a high achieving school that had a suicide epidemic. And I talk about how it went on for years. I mean, and we're talking about multiple kids committing suicide, super high achieving kids with everything in the world going for them, not like marginal, depressed dropouts, kids at the center of the school, great athletes, brilliant grades, something. It was because the school had raised expectations to such an absurd level that there was no escape for teenagers. So kids are trying to struggle and find out who they are. And there was no opportunity to do that in school. There's only one pathway, and that is you had to get into an Ivy League school and you had to be captain of your sports team. And that culture, although, has all kinds of positive things attached to it, there's people who can't make it, right? And who crumble. And it's contagious. The first person crumbles, and suddenly other kids look at that and say, oh, that's a legitimate response to my feeling overwhelmed. And then when it's 2, it's easier to get to 3. And when it's 3, it's easier to get to 4. And before you know it, you have a full-scale epidemic on your hands. It was very, very sobering. It was all about what happens when you have a monoculture in a high school, when every single kid is pursuing the same thing.
Yeah.
That makes it really, really hard for kids to find meaning in what they're doing. And the thing I've been thinking a lot about that chapter since is it's really kind of helped my understanding of the importance of diversity in teams. I don't mean the narrow sense of that word as in ethnic diversity.
Yep.
I mean in the broadest possible sense that an effective team has got to have people who think differently and are pursuing different approaches to things. You can all have a common purpose, but there must be some variation in how people are.
Yeah. So where's the line there in terms of, right? Like, so talking about thinking differently, there's sort of the extremes, right? One is like everyone goes along with the herd, which can, in certain circumstances, can be good, right? You talk about pro-social contagion, right? Like can be good groundswell there, and there's reasons why operating in teams is a great thing, like we talked about. But then there's this whole other way to go, which is like, screw everybody, I'm just doing my own thing. It's all about like my authentic self and everything. And where's the happy medium there of like, when is it right to sort of like go with the crowd, and when is it, because I especially hear that the other message today of just like, be yourself, whatever you are, that's the thing. Screw what anyone else thinks. Yeah. Right.
I mean, that's it's the hardest question we have. I'll say a couple things about that. One is that for adolescents, this is a much more complicated problem than it is for adults. If you're still finding who you are, I feel like these kind of very, very strict monocultures are problematic. A 14-year-old, a 13-year-old, there's not one way. There can't be at that. You don't even know who you are yourself. You're still growing. You got hormones racing through you. The idea that you should be, imprisoned on a kind of is crazy. Yeah. For adults, it's different. I think for adults, when we know who we are, it's easier for us to assemble around a common purpose and follow so that's the one issue. The other issue is it's about what's the group trying to achieve? So if what we're doing is highly complex cognitive labor with a long time frame and an uncertain outcome. I'd like to shade on the side of individuality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of payoff to all of us approaching a problem the same way. I want to hear around the boardroom table or whatever. I want to hear as wide a variety of voices so I can, if I am trying to execute on a very specific high stakes task in a limited period of time, then I want to shade on the other direction. I want to have some kind of uniformity of purpose and approach. So it's just about picking like when we're doing a show here at Pushkin, at the beginning, when we're conceiving of things, I want a million different voices in the room. When we're on deadline with a week left and I don't want to hear about your problems with it.
Yeah.
You had your opportunity a month ago and now we're focused, right? So I think it's about understanding the situation. But the kids in that chapter, it's just about the kids part. It's just like, why? I don't know why we want to treat 14-year-olds as adults is beyond me.
Yeah.
Like it's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly now when the world's so complicated, you're not going to hit your stride anyway until you're in your 40s.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's like, so what's that? What's the big hurry here?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's.
I know. And I mean, obviously, so I don't, you have kids, right? Are they
super young? They're like 10 months and.
Oh, wow.
And I got about to be a 3-year-old and it's hilarious because I've been opining on parenthood for years, even though I never had kids. Now I have them.
Yeah.
And then realized, oh shit, was I like totally full of it?
Yeah. I mean, so I have a 17-year-old, 15-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And so.
Oh my God. You're like, this is like.
Yeah. I mean, and they're they're great kids. I have all boys, which does make things easier, I think, because you don't have
tell me that. I got 2 girls.
No, it's not. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like having them all the same sex makes certain things easier because it's like you just, they could all stay in the same room and you could just hand down all the clothes and like there's things that just, okay, we've been through this with 2 boys. We got a third boy, which, sort of rinse and repeat a little bit. But the things about the adolescent stuff, about the like, how do you parent them like the right direction there? I think there is a balance you have to strike. And what the team thing is something where that's why I think like being a part of a sport is so important as a kid. You don't have to be good at it. I don't even care about that. But like I was a soccer player. So one of my sons plays soccer. And so I coach. I try to coach his team as assistant coach and do my best there. I'm not really trained at it, but I know enough to like, help out.
Yeah.
But I mean, I talked to him about it where I'm like, look, dude, you're probably not going to be a professional soccer player. You might not even play in college. A lot of this is about learning how to work with other people, how to problem solve, how to lead, how to follow. Like there's so much benefit. And like too often, I think it's all about like the competition. It's all about like, we got to be in the best program and Olympic development and everything and all of this kind of stuff. And, I just.
And get out of your own head. I mean, my experience with sports, I'm still call myself a competitive runner at this point is ridiculous, but I've been a runner my whole life.
Yeah.
It's just another world where the rules are different, where the social standards are different, where when I run with people, no one cares what anyone does for a living or how much money they make or whether they've had a massive failure in their life. We just care. We're just running, right? We're just happy to get together. And the idea of having a world where all the rules are different is just so, I think, it's such relief is the wrong word. It's a source of strength. It just allows you to recharge in a kind of really beautiful way. I can't explain it to people who don't do this. I mean, anyone who's been involved in sports knows what I'm talking about. It's just like, you think you're exhausting yourself. You're actually not. It's the opposite.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's refreshing in some way to do it that way.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I've run plenty in my life. I certainly had to do a ton of it in the military, but like now I'm a CrossFitter. That's kind of my thing. And yeah, I mean, it's exhausting physically every day going to the gym, but there's going back to the community thing. There's the part of what makes it so great is the group of people. It's sort of like there's a competition in the gym, in the box, and there's social aspects of it, and it's like one of the things I look forward to every day, even though it's super painful and like exhausting when I do it.
I do think, I mean, we're getting a little far afield, but I love this topic so much. I think I did this conversation with these two women who'd written about girls' sports, but it really applies to all sports. One of them was a woman named Linda Flanagan, who was a coach of teenage girls. And she wrote this book about what she thought was wrong with youth sports. And she's of the mind that we're ruining it. And she has several arguments. You know, one is we're ruining it because competition starts too early at a time when 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds should not be training as if that's obvious. I think many people would agree with that. She had this big thing about how she thought parents ruined it. She thought that like parents should stay out of their kids' sports. She doesn't, not to know. One is because it makes it miserable for the coaches. But more than that, she thought like there's something, she's referring to the kind of crazy parents.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I'm talking about.
Totally.
You go to events and there's like and she's like, that's ruined it for the kid. The kid just wants to do something fun and escape from expectations and something. And then their mom or their dad, who doesn't know necessarily anything about the sport, who hasn't been there for all the practices, is screaming at the top of their lungs and embarrassing them. And she's like, she just said, you know, why can't we create a space that is, you know, more fun and safer for the kid at a time when that's what they really want, is a little bit of a escape.
Yeah.
That was beautiful advice.
No, I think it's exactly right. Like, I think we'll move on, but just the last kind of point on that topic is when we got like kind of the group of coaches, soccer coaches together, and they were talking about like, you know, talk about what coach you really didn't like when you were a kid, like sort of almost turned you off from the sport. And I said, well, I didn't really I don't have a coach that stands out. The thing that turned me off sometimes was the politicking of the sport. Like there was just politics involved with the parents, kind of what you're talking about. And I saw that because like my dad was like commissioner of the league and everything. And it was just like, why do we have this? We have to get away from this.
Her other big idea is that we should ban athletic scholarships.
Interesting.
She said that would remove the pressure. So a college should say, if there's someone who's good at a sport and can't afford to go to the school, they should give them financial aid.
Yeah.
That makes sense. She said, but don't base it on their ability, because that's what's fueling all this craziness, is that parents have this,
for sure,
this vision in their head that they're going to get their kids' college paid for if they're good enough at, you know, throwing a football.
Yeah.
And I think I agree with that as well. There's just has to be a way to kind of rethink the way that works.
Yeah. Getting back a little bit to kind of this Revenge of the Tipping Point and that stuff. What else? Like, so I was actually kind of reflecting on it, thinking about it. So like 2000, when the original one came out, there really hadn't been, I don't think social media was even a thing yet, right? Like nothing legitimate, certainly.
Yeah.
So is that a big part of the sort of change?
I don't talk about it. Maybe I should have. I don't, because I felt like so much has been written about social media.
Yeah.
And I find it kind of, somebody hacked my Twitter account, so I shut it down.
Oh, really?
And then I just haven't bothered to revive it, and I couldn't be happier. So
I hear that a lot. I'm not much of a Twitterer, or Xer or whatever it is these days. But
I wanted to talk about things that people weren't talking about. So that's the reason. Like and so that's why I avoided the internet. Not because it's not important, but just because my value, I think, was to be thinking about other kinds of subjects. I was really interested. I have this chapter where I talk about group proportions, and in a group, how many people do you need of who think a certain way or are a certain way? What's critical mass for the minority group before that group starts to feel like they can be themselves and contribute? And it's a totally fascinating topic. All kinds of people over the years have weighed in on this in various contexts. If I have a board of directors for a company, and I got 9 slots, and I want to have women on my board, okay, how many women do you need before the women can be themselves? Right? One is not. If you're one, you're a token. if people are still looking at you weird. So how many do you need? The answer is, someone says you probably need 3 out of 9. But everyone comes down on a third. And it's totally, if you go to other contexts as well, people keep coming back to, if you're an outsider, you need to be part at least of a third before you can contribute meaningfully. And I thought the applications of that for thinking about how groups work, I think are just endlessly fascinating. There's some research on, excuse me, that I get into on, if you look at black-white test scores, the most interesting way to look at them is as a function of what percentage of students in a classroom are black. When the percentage approaches a third, the test score gap starts to shrink. And not because the white kids are doing worse, they're doing exactly the same. That it's really hard to be the 1 or 2 of a kind in a group. And that hurts your performance. And when it's like weird, but the data is like huge data sets. And you're like, the gap starts to disappear when the number of minority students hits a certain point. But I've thought about that in terms of putting together meaningful groups.
Yeah. Well,
like there's clear group tipping points, in other words, and we should pay attention to them.
Yeah. And real group tipping points, right? So it's like, I mean, again, it just goes, I hear this, I have so many conversations with people where it just goes back to this like need for community and a real community, right? Like the difference between people that are together truly working on something and then sort of like ideological tribe that has so many, has a lot of bad implications or bad ways that can go. I just think it's so different. And I think that, man, we have to work so hard these days to try and find that somehow in our lives, you know? So you also have a new season of Revisionist History coming out that is about the 1936 Berlin Olympics, right?
Yeah.
And so talk about that, because it's funny. I was listening to you on the Rich Roll podcast talk about the I can't remember the year, but the sort of Black Panther that whole thing, Legacy of Speed, right? Like that whole thing, which was super interesting to hear about. I mean, like him, he's like, of course I know that photo, but I didn't know much about the story. So, so here's another Olympic story, which has racism involved in it, obviously, as well, but like a completely kind of different context. So yeah, talk about what brought you to that and kind of where's that story go? Like
I get all my ideas from my friends. A friend of mine just said, you guys should do a continuing series on the Olympics. Just pick a different year every year and just do the story of those games. And he said, and you should start with 36, which I knew. I knew Jesse Owens. I knew it's in Berlin. Right. It's Hitler's big games. And so we started to dig into it, and it's really, really, really interesting on so many levels. We're really interested in the story around the games, not about the games. When we start with this question of, should we have gone? Which was a huge debate in the summer in 1934 and 1935. There's this huge debate across the United States about the Olympics are coming up. They're in Germany. This guy Hitler hasn't shown all of his cards in 35, 36, but kind of has. We know he's not a pleasant character. We know that he's using the games for propaganda purposes. We know he really hates Jews. He won't let any Jews be on the German Olympic team. And the question is, how upset about that should we be? And should we be willing to sacrifice sport and opportunities for athletes because of a matter of principle? And that is like, we're still having those kinds of arguments today. How do you balance out? If you boycott in 36, if we had not gone in 36, we probably wouldn't have the Olympics today.
Really?
So they probably, it saves the games. The games are sort of in trouble. There's no games in 1940, obviously, or 44. And if we'd boycotted 36, we would have gone from 1932 to 1948 without an Olympic Games. And they were already struggling. The Germans kind of really revive it. Probably there's no way that they would have survived in some really kind of shrunken form. So we have the games, and I'm a huge Olympics, we have them because we made a real compromise in 36 where we said, we're going to hold our nose and go.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer to it. You can work through it a million ways. Are we really better off if we don't have Jesse Owens winning 4 gold medals and kind of demonstrating to the Nazis that their theories about racial superiority are false.
Yeah.
At the same time, the games do, serve a real purpose for Hitler and establish his legitimacy with the German people. I mean, but we tease and we talk a lot about what it tells us about America in the mid-30s. The kind of, this was a country with a lot of its own problems that was kind of lecturing the rest of the world about how they treated their racial minorities. I mean, there's that, which is super interesting. And the characters, it's just amazing. There's this one guy who we fell in love with, a guy named Charles Sherrill, who's this kind of rich, he used to be a world champion sprinter, and he's this rich guy from New York who is just a complete doofus. And he's at the center of every decision about 1936. He's this blowhard who goes over and meets Hitler and loves Hitler and writes a 20-page essay about his love. He then dies in 36, so he can't clean out his archives. Because all the guys who loved Hitler, who lived until after the war, once they realize, oh my God, Hitler's a terrible guy, they go back and they destroy all of their anything they said that was nice about Hitler.
Sure.
This guy dies in 36, and his widow just gives all of his papers in a big box to the New York Historical Society. So it's all there. It's hilarious. So you see what these kind of weird kind of proto-fascists in America were thinking in those years. Anyway, there's a lot of that. It's just kind of great. We end up going to Alabama to tell the story of the Scottsboro Boys in 1932, and there's just it's an enormously kind of fascinating and entertaining 10 episode description about that time, and all of it is, like I said, you're just thinking about the present day the entire time.
Yeah. Wow. When you start, what grew Revisionist History for you? When you started the podcast, what was the impetus there? Obviously you've been a writer with a number of books and all of that, but what made you kind of want to go, okay, we're going to add a podcast in the mix and go that direction?
I wanted a forum where I could be, podcasts, you can be a lot more mischievous and a lot more whimsical than you can on a page.
Mm-hmm.
And I am much more mischievous than I appear on the page. I love stirring up trouble and saying things that make people. So that was that.
That's a good characteristic to have.
Yes. I'm also someone who I'm constantly reading something or hearing about something or watching something that just makes me mad. And I wanted to have or that cracks me up, or that's something. And I wanted to have a forum to kind of opine about it.
Uh-huh.
My riff, one of the episodes we did a couple of years back, one of my favorites was this whole thing I had about golf courses.
Okay.
And how, it was all about, if you drive through LA, there's all these golf courses in the middle of the most expensive neighborhoods in the country. And I was always like, how on earth do they afford the property taxes? How does LA Country Club, someone calculated, that's $15 to $20 billion worth of real estate.
Yeah.
It's right in the middle of Beverly Hills, 200 acres, right? And the answer is they don't pay property tax. So the whole episode was about, wait a minute, you pay property tax, I pay property tax. Why don't a bunch of rich people are sitting on $20 billion of real estate in the middle of Beverly Hills and they don't pay any property tax first, and they won't let anyone into their club? It's not like, I don't know if you're a golfer.
Not at all. I'm a terrible golfer. Terrible. Yeah.
You cannot go to LA and play on the LA Country Club. No chance.
Of course not. No.
It's $300,000, $400,000 just to get in.
Yeah.
So why are we giving them a tax break? So I did a whole thing. This has been obsessing me for years. So I did a whole episode on how they got the tax break and how outrageous it is. And
So here's a question about just the overall concept of sort of the revisionist history, which I was thinking about, which is, it's sort of like the other thing we're talking about, the contagion. Where's the line? Where's the line? Because for the longest time, I think for the most part, we were taught here's history and that's what happened. And okay, and I'm going to take a test on that. And now I remember this, and we pass it on. And then at some point, people started kind of going, well, maybe that's not exactly right. History is obviously written by the victors. We know that. And so maybe we got some of that wrong a little bit. But now it's gone full blown into, for a lot of people, like everything's a complete conspiracy theory, right? Like it's completely wrong and it's totally like, it's total bullshit. And so again, like how do you thread that needle, right? Of being able to say, okay, so there's a bias here, clearly, probably with most of it. However, it's probably based on fact. And figuring out like what we do need to retell in a slightly different lens or through a slightly different lens. And what's like, yeah, you know what, whatever, like, you know what I'm saying? Like just where that line is.
I think it's the model you're using. And I think we get into this trouble because we're not framing history correctly. What we're doing is what happens. And the bad version of this is the person who comes along and says, this story you were told is all wrong. It's actually this. The framers of the American Republic were a bunch of like bigoted white guys who throw out your previous, they're all kind of heroic. That's the wrong frame. It's about layers.
Yes.
So the first layer is totally true. The framers of the American Republic were a bunch of extraordinary, thoughtful, brilliant, courageous people who conceived of the first great functioning democracy in the world out of nothing, right? Second layer, they're complicated. They're human beings, right? Third layer, this is the 18th century, right? They're living. Yeah. Fourth, we can keep going,
yes, right?
And then we can tell their individual stories. These guys have mistresses and they have debts and they tell lies and they get into trouble and they get into fistfights and whatever. We can keep on going down, but it doesn't, just because I've discovered a sixth layer doesn't invalidate the first five.
Right.
We need to kind of
yes.
hold it in our head that that like all human beings, they're complicated, but we don't, because they're historical figures, often we have lost the complication in the way we tell the story for the first time.
Yep.
And what history does is restore the complication. George Washington is not just a handsome face on a piece of money.
Yeah,
he's a human being, right? He did all kinds of like complicated. So once you think about it, I think of what I do as adding layers, and I don't think that any layer invalidates a previous layer. I just think it adds to it.
Yeah, I love that. I always think of it as like trying to at least separate the ideas from the people. So it's like, you know, if you had the Constitution, like if you had no clue who wrote it, great ideas, right? And you don't have to inject the personal lives of the writers, the framers, whatever, into that. It doesn't invalidate anything that's being said there. I mean, I've had this argument too with people like Marcus Aurelius, you know, like rip him apart for slaughtering people or whatever he had to do as an emperor. It's like but meditations are good. Those are good ideas, guys, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, I think that's another, this idea that we're deepening, we're not simplifying, we're deepening our understanding.
Yeah.
That's the function of history. And, you know, we have incredible amount of difficulty at the moment holding two contradictory ideas in our heads.
Yeah, we sure do. Yeah.
And that is the definition of intelligence, right? Yeah. That's what intelligence is.
And is that in and of itself a social contagion right now? That idea of not being able to hold, right?
Yeah. Although I think a lot of what's odd to me is I think most people do that. They do it quietly and without a lot of fanfare. But they are unexpectedly sophisticated in the way they view the world. I remember I had a thing in my book about why did America so quickly change its mind about gay marriage? I have a whole chapter about it. How'd that happen? It's like, everyone who's involved in social change says that's an unprecedented transformation. We went from being adamantly opposed to it and thinking about a constitutional amendment to basically the opposition just dissipating in the course of a couple of years, less than 10 years. And I think there was a lot of that very kind of complicated, a lot of people who would have an emotional problem and a psychological problem with gay marriage, with gay relationships, with simultaneously had people in their lives who were gay, who they realized were like them in many ways. And they didn't have to reconcile those. It wasn't that they threw out the level of personal discomfort they had with some of this stuff. They just kept it. And they said, but you know what? This other thing is actually really important, valuable. And I'm going to tamp down on one and like build up on the other.
Yeah.
I'm going to allow I'm going to be tolerant of someone else's freedom because I see it's important to them. That's what they did. And I think I love that, actually. I love that people are complicated enough that they don't have to, we're not asking people to swap out their personality for a new personality every time we have some new social change or transformation. We're asking them just to kind of have a little more complexity in the way you see the world, right?
Yeah.
Just accept that, things can be a little different. And that, like I said, that capacity of human beings has always impressed me. Of most people are like that. At the fringes, they're not. But
yeah,
I don't spend a lot of time in the fringes. So
yeah,
every time I'm on an airplane and I have a conversation with a woman or guy next to me, I come away impressed by the sophistication with which they see the world. Every time. Like, I don't know where I don't know this. I don't see the kind of craziness there. I see people who've got kids and they're worried about the world in which their kids are growing up in, which is kind of what I worry about too, principally. Or I see people who they're worrying about making ends meet, or they're like, they got a parent in an old age home.
So,
and it's the same.
So does that point or lend itself to this idea of like, one of the biggest social epidemics we have now is actually just like sort of the media interpretation of the world. Like, you know what I mean? Painting this sort of almost false picture of the way people actually are, where it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's just representing the fringes basically. And it's just a big machine designed to make people angry. And
the fringes get way more attention than they deserve, but it's more than that. It's that if I ask you and I, we could do an exercise right now where I could figure out a subject on which you and I disagree.
Sure.
And we could just talk about that subject and things could get quite heated. But what we would be doing is ignoring the fact that probably on 9 other things in the top 10 things we care about, we probably agree. So it's where do we choose to, and on balance, once we understood the full 10, that we agree on 9 and disagree on 1, we would be fine with our disagreement. Who cares? Like,
right.
Of course we don't agree on all 10, right?
Yeah.
How could we?
Well, but
even 7 and 3, it might be 5 and 5. I don't know. But you got to understand all 10. You need to know the denominator, right, of things that we care about. And once you look at the denominator, you realize, oh, it's just normal human disagreement. We just never we never bother to ask about the denominator. We just focus on zero in on the fact that,
well, it's so funny.
What is it that you and I disagree on? I'm curious.
I don't know. I'm sure we could dig and find something, but yeah, it's funny because you hear people all the time these days too, where they'll like preface an interview and they say, we don't agree about everything. And it's like, of course you don't agree about it. Like, who do you agree about? Agree on everything about. I don't know anybody. My family members I don't agree with on everything. Like, there's nobody. It'd be boring.
I don't believe in air conditioning. I'm sure you probably do.
Oh, yes, I like air conditioning.
I recognize that that's an irrational position, but I will go to my entire life is about turning off the air conditioning and my wife turning it back on. That's
yeah.
That's dumb.
Well, if you've spent time in places, and I'm sure you have, but places on Earth where it's 120. Oh, do you really like that hot? Like,
oh, hotter. When I was a kid and I was running competitively, I would train in the summer at noon because I wanted to train in the maximum humidity and whenever it was race time, and the races are never at night. I mean, I'm running distance. I'm running 1,500 meter, 3,000. Those races they're in August, and you're on at 1 o'clock on a black track, right?
Yeah.
And everyone looks at that and they die inside, and I'm like,
bring it on.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
I love this. It's like, that was my big, and I would let everyone else know that, oh my God, this is fantastic. They're all like sitting there like dunking water over themselves. So no, I have a weird affection for hot, humid weather. The hotter and the more humid it is, the the happier I am.
Not me. I am not in that boat. I do not like it. I mean, I'm okay with some heat, but yeah, not. Ugh. I lived in St. Thomas for 3 years, and I can like it just that. I actually liked that. Like, there's something you get sort of comfort. This comfortable. You get comfortable, sort of being semi-sweaty the whole time, but still like to sleep. Certainly when with air conditioning.
When I was a kid, I was growing up in Canada, and we would go, my mom's Jamaican, we would go to Jamaica to visit my grandparents, and we'd always go in December. And you'd come from freezing cold Canada, and the door to the plane would open. And of course, back then, you just took stairs down onto the tarmac.
Yeah, right.
And the door would open, and you would feel that air coming in. And
Yep.
I've never forgotten that. To me, that was the single greatest. And the smell was that incredible smell of, well, if you were in St. Thomas.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, for sure.
I've never gotten that out of my head. That intoxicating feeling of like, oh my God, I can run around naked. I was like, whatever I was, 7 years old.
Well,
and I can smell that smell, and I am so far from snow and ice right now, and it's the best thing in the world.
Yeah. So a couple of things I wanted to, first of all, just on Pushkin Industries, and how that was the podcast first, was the company first? Like, which kind of came? Podcast first.
And we decided to spin it up. The company that we were doing it with wanted to get rid of its podcasts. So me and my friend Jacob spun out Pushkin Industries, and we added a bunch of other things. And now we have this sort of shop where we do lots of audio.
And are you creating those podcasts in-house and then like finding hosts for it? Or are you bringing other ones in that are already?
Combination of both.
Okay.
What we're really interested in doing is telling longer narrative stories.
Yeah.
So I did an audiobook with Paul Simon, where I sat down with him for 40 hours and turned that into an audiobook. It's just about his music. Him talking about his music and me interviewing him and coming up with theories. I'm doing one right now where I found this woman who, if you have a client who's like a school shooter or someone who's committed some horrible crime, and your client gets the death penalty and you want the death penalty mitigated, there's one person you call who will come and try and explain to the court why someone who appears to deserve no mercy deserves some mercy. And she's the most extraordinary woman I think I've ever met. And I've just been sitting with her, and we're up to about 15 hours right now of conversation. We're not even close to being done. I'm going to turn that into something. I don't know what it is. I just love the way she looks at the world. I love her empathy. She spent a huge amount of time, 20 years of her life, treating survivors of torture. And has an appreciation and an understanding of what PTSD is, which is was a phrase to me. I vaguely knew what it was. She could explain it she's been explaining it to me viscerally and with real example. I treated this person who went through this, and this is what it meant.
Yeah.
And making me understand that something that I think most of us, you would be different, because I think you probably know people who have, if you've not been through
me. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm very vocal publicly about my own struggles, for sure.
So I didn't know anything about that. And people who'd explained it to me didn't explain it properly. So we spent, 6 hours.
Yeah.
And her just telling individual stories about what it's like and what it takes to bring someone back.
That's great. Right. I think, as you build out content, I'm not trying to put ideas in your head, but like, I think, especially given the sort of mental health landscape these days, not just among veterans, but everybody, I think stories of sort of the different struggles people have, people that have overcome them in different ways, and I'm somebody who's been on this personal journey of that for over a decade and gone down tons of rabbit holes of different treatments and you name it, and seen success in certain places, not so much in others, met people who have, and it's just something that can be approached and treated and worked out of in so many different ways. And I think it's really helpful for people. I can tell you, as somebody who's struggled too, like stories of the sufferers are so helpful. They're so helpful, you know. It's just a different thing. So that's cool. Wow, I'm very curious about this. Pushkin is obviously Alexander Pushkin, right? I mean, like based on your little icon. I mean, like that's who it is, right?
Complicated. It's actually my first dog as a kid.
Ah, okay.
We had a dog called Pushkin. My dad loved to name everything, and for some reason he named everything in his life after Russians, Russian poets, Russian. I don't know why. He didn't speak Russian. He just thought it was hilarious. So we had this mutt when I was a kid, who my dad called Pushkin, and then we had one called Tolstoy and one called we ran the whole gamut.
Oh, got it.
And as a joke, I called this Pushkin Industries, and then we used the real Pushkin. I didn't want to put a picture of my old dog because I thought that was dumb. So we just adopted. We just pretended it's the real Pushkin. It's not. It's this lovable half German Shepherd, half Labrador, who was the first dog I ever had in my life, and who was so delightful and would go running with me. And
okay, got it. Yeah, because I was trying to figure it out. I'm like, okay, what's this backstory here?
No,
so it wasn't. That's not what I had in my mind at all.
It's a mutt who I adored.
So last couple things here. Can you just talk about like your process? Like, I'm sure you've read The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield, which is like one of my favorite kind of like process books for anybody that's engaged in any kind of skill or anything that they're trying to get better at. But like, what's your process? As somebody who's just such a prolific kind of writer and podcaster, I mean, I think through this of like between the new Revisionist History and the Medal of Honor series and your new book, like that's a lot of content. So how do you do that on a day-to-day basis? Do you have you sit down for a certain period of time? What's that look like for you? Kind of curious.
I'm pretty disciplined. It's just about, you got to work it. I always remember years and years and years ago, Jesse Jackson, when he was running for president, gave this famous speech, and it was called, the theme of the speech was how everyone thinks that poor people are lazy, and they're not. And the refrain, he used to always have a refrain.
Yeah.
And the refrain was, they go to work every day. And I remember hearing that. I was thinking, I love that. I think about it all the time. And it's just about, you got to go to work every day. Like, I think it's about it's consistently chipping away every day. It's something that I'm working on, and taking the time to setting aside. One of the reasons I love running is that I go out on a run, and it's my time to kind of think through a lot of those kinds of things that I'm working on, problems I'm trying to solve. And having a team around you that helps you, doesn't hinder you. And if you can find joy in something, it's not hard to be prolific. It's only hard to be prolific if it's a slog. And I have so much fun. Like,
I'm sure.
I'm enjoying myself now. I mean,
yes, I'm sure you have a lot of fun.
Myself, I would be, I'd be like looking at my watch and be like, gotta do it.
But even having fun with it, I mean, a lot of the stuff, these are complex and complicated ideas where you're trying to kind of weave these things together. So do you feel that, like that whole concept of resistance, right? Do you feel that at times where it's a challenge?
No, because the complexities, if my experience with the world is that if you try and do something hard and you give it your best shot, people are unbelievably accepting of the result. Where people get upset and where you run into real resistance from the world is when you botch something easy, and people rightfully they're like, why am I wasting my time? It wasn't that hard, and you didn't put in the time to do it. And we were just talking today about some documentary we saw on the History Channel. It's just not, I don't want to diss them, but it was just lazy. It's like, why are you doing that? Like, just work a little harder. And so I always think, in some senses, the world is so generous towards you if you're trying to do something that's just a little bit more sophisticated. And I think about that in case of music, for example. I'm so much more appreciative of, or a film where you can tell they're trying to tweak it, and it doesn't have to be perfect. If I know they're doing something that's like ambitious, I don't require perfection anymore. I I'm more interested in the kind of courage that it takes to do it, or the ingenuity, or like the degree of difficulty. I love that you know, so often I find myself appreciating something someone's done, and my first thought is, man, I love that they tried to do that. Like, I just love that they went there, right? Like, how odd. There was a pass last night in the NBA game where, in the Celtics Dallas game, where Drew Holiday goes under the basket, right under the basket, and then like whips the ball left-handed. Like, what?
I'm from Boston, so I was watching this game.
Yeah. And I saw that, and I'm like, but it was a success, but I would have loved it even if it wasn't a success. I just loved that he tried it. It's like so badass.
Yeah.
Like, good for him. You know, like that's my, and so that as long as I'm trying to do like this thing with this woman who spends her time with, I've been interviewing about, it's going to be hard to make a story out of it. I've got a huge amount of material. I'm dealing with like really sensitive topics, but I just think that it's going to be fantastic because it is hard, right? And because people are going to say, I want to learn about that. And the single best thing somebody can come away from if they listen to something you do or read something you do is if they don't feel it's complete and they're inspired to go and learn more.
Yeah.
That is the best case scenario. You've whet my appetite.
Yeah. I think kind of last thing here is, how do you feel about AI though, injecting into that mix? Like in terms of, you talk about sort of the appreciation of something that has a human element to it, that slight imperfection, whatever. And I know as someone who, I spend a lot of time writing different things, but you get this sort of suggestion from Grammarly or whatever sometimes, and I go, it's like, make this more inspirational or whatever. And I'm like, I don't really like the way that sounds there. Like, do we risk just kind of ruining all of that with?
I don't think so. Because I think about, so over the course of my life, I worked at the Washington Post when the Washington Post was in its heyday. I worked at the New Yorker when the New Yorker was the dominant, prestigious, still is, magazine. And then I came to, my publisher was one of the big publishing houses with the very best editorial talent. At every step of my career, I've had the benefit of having 99th percentile editors. Right? Most people are not that lucky, right? By definition, only 1% of us can have a 99th percentile editor, right? What AI is going to do is give the whole world access to editorial direction as good as what I've had my whole life. How can I complain? It's like, fantastic. It's like, it's not, it's the beneficiaries of AI are always going to be the people who have been left out.
Yeah.
That's the first benefit. And that's sort of one thing. The other thing I'm going to think about it is AI is going to allow so many people who are good at something to be even better. I was visiting my mom who was in the hospital, and the doctor comes around on rounds, and she's been waiting all morning. I was with her to talk to the doctor to kind of figure out what's going on. Doctor's with us, and I can tell he's talking with her. He's got 5 minutes. That's all he has. Poor guy, he's got an entire ward he's got to deal with. If I could give him a tool that gave him an extra 5 minutes with my mom, that would be amazing. Because she doesn't need knowledge. She doesn't need high technology. She needs somebody who is interested in her and listens and gives her the benefit of their experience. What she needs, right?
Yeah.
AI could give that guy an extra 5 minutes to talk to my mom. And that, I was talking to this group of AI guys recently, and I was like, you guys are too focused on the big things and not focused enough on the little things. This could transform those kind of everyday encounters in a way that's like magical for mankind. Like, there's going to be a farmer in the middle of Bangladesh who's going to get world-class agricultural advice on his phone.
Yeah.
Like, that is phenomenal.
Right.
Like, don't tell me about these. You're not talking about these huge, big things. Go and talk to that farmer and tell him no one has ever given that guy the time of day. Right? No one has ever given that guy this. And now he's going to get it on his phone.
Yeah.
Like, that is just genius.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. It was great to talk to you, like, and to meet you, kind of go through all this stuff. Is there anything else? I mean, we talked about, I think, everything you got kind of coming out, but is there anything else that you want to?
No, there's always more people, but no, this has been really fun. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, I really, and again, I will just go back to the first thing we talked about with the Medal of Honor series. Like, once that comes out, listen to it. It's just so well. It's so well done.
About the best one. The one called this guy Tiber Rubin. Can I give a real quick?
Please, dude.
Break?
Yeah. Please.
Here's the premise of Tiber. Tiber is he's Jewish. He's from Eastern Europe. As a kid, he goes to a concentration camp. I think it's Auschwitz. Survives. Is liberated by GIs and says, "I want to be a GI." Moves to America and tries to join the army, and they won't let him because his English is terrible. He just pesters them. They let him in. Goes to Korea. Does incredibly heroic things, gets captured, gets sent to a Korean concentration camp, his second concentration camp, right? And there's all these guys, all the guys from his, like, they were all captured as a big group. There's like 50 guys all together, and they're unbelievable circumstances. Like, these are worse than the Nazi concentration camps. And Tiber's like, "Guys, I got this. I've been through this." And he like, "This one, you will be in tears on this one. This guy's amazing." And he like basically takes the entire group of 50 guys in the middle of this concentration camp in the middle of nowhere on his back and shows them how to survive.
Yeah.
Which bark do you eat? How do you get rid of how do you make sure you don't get typhus? How do you he knows it all.
And
it's insane. The whole story is insane.
But what's his Medal of Honor for?
For the stuff he does in Korea. It turns out, well, I don't know. Does he get the Medal of Honor for the concentration camp he's also this incredible, he does like 5 amazing things when he's in battle. Like, because it's complicated because he has, anyway, I don't want to ruin it, but I even forgot. He does so many amazing things in his life, but he's just like, at the end of it, you're like, oh my God. Like, he's like, literally he gets in and he's just totally unfazed by this concentration. He's like, "I did this already. Guys, let me show you the way."
Yeah. Well,
in his thick Eastern European accent, right?
Well, like I said, I mean, I listened to those 2 episodes. Those were the ones I was given access to. And I thought, okay, I got to listen to these so I'm prepared. But they were so good that I listened to them again. I listened to them twice. And both times, again, I was, even with Tommy Norris and Mike Thornton, like, I know that story. And it just got me so emotional listening to it again. Yeah,
it's the Tiber code. I'm almost choking up just telling you about it. It's just so the idea that guy, the twist where like everyone else would be like, "I cannot believe this. For the second time in 15 years, I'm being sent to a concentration camp."
Yes, right. Yeah.
He's like, "Guys, climb on board." Remember when Cedric Maxwell, if you're a Celtics fan?
Yeah, I remember Cedric Maxwell. Yep.
Remember he goes, "Climb on board," or no, get on my. He's something like, "Everyone climb on my back."
Yeah.
I'm taking you to someone. There's some finals, game where he scores like 35 points. Anyway, it's like that. It's like Cedric.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's just those stories just make you think, like, on your worst day, Rick, really, is it all that bad? Like, it's not that bad, So, well, thanks again. Great to meet you. Really appreciate you being here. Keep doing everything you're doing, obviously. And hopefully we'll get you back at some point too. There's other stuff I could talk about. This
is so much fun.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for listening to On the X, an Ironclad original, presented by the Navy SEAL Foundation. See you next time.